preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
All right, now I thought this is our last session. We'll try to put a lot of things together. I thought a way of getting what we want to get at this seminar is what is American society all about? What is its structure like? And especially around ethnicity, group membership, that we talked about last time. And a good way to get at it, it seems to me, is to discuss what seems like very abstract stuff, but I'll make it very concrete, is what are the values of American society? What is it that makes us do what we do? And how are people who are different from ourselves, how do they behave different from ourselves? I'll refer to some of that. So I'd like to start with this. So this is what I put on a blackboard. The values, I really shouldn't say America, the United States, because America includes South America. The values of a United States, American society, as they illuminate our societal structure, our society, and influence our behavior. That means your behavior. So I'm going to ask you to stop asking questions. Now, questions for discussion. Now, number one, since there's a group of women and mothers and grandmothers, is a mother's love for her child conditioned by these values?
No.
All right? How many would say, generally speaking, no? In other words, a mother's love is absolute. It doesn't depend on anything extraneous, outside the house or outside the child, is what you're saying.
Yeah, first we have to determine what the values are.
Yes. All right. All right, so you say, okay, that gives us a good basis for discussion, that we have disagreement. So you say the values have nothing to do with it. Well, let's mention what some of the values are. American society is characterized by a heavy influence on achievement and success. That is, automatically, without your saying to yourself in a conscious manner, I want my child to be successful, or I think it important that my child be successful. It's taken for granted because we absorb that, so to speak, with our mother's milk. You can absorb it through radio, through television, through the books that you read, from conversations and whatnot. It's automatically assumed, especially in Jewish middle-class families. The kid's in high school, he's going to go to college, he's going to have a career of some sort. You don't sit down and say, my child will have a career. It's kind of taken for granted. See, it's also taken for granted that he will achieve something. He will do competitively well, we hope, or the child as well. You even see commercials. Little girl skipping rope, my child will amount to something. And you notice that the voices they have, there's a southern voice, a black voice, because of a southern accent, a Spanish voice, because they want people to identify with this. Now that's a value of American society, achievement and success. Do you agree or disagree? Agree. All right. Now, incidentally, a way of looking at this, if this were a 15-week course, we'd put on a blackboard which groups believe this more or less. You see, now, for instance, a farmer in the Midwest or a Scandinavian, or Puerto Ricans, blacks, and so on. If we take, let's say, the Jews and compare with any other group, is the emphasis on achievement success high or low among middle-class Jews? Very high. How about working-class Jews?
Are we talking 1965 or 1971?
Today, March 3rd, 4th, 5th.
No, I think there's been a
today.
change. I'm
Oh, yeah,
sorry.
all right, okay.
I think that my answer is there's been a change in the upper class Jewish
What way?
value on achievement and success. I think within the generation in their 20s is not as strong as it was for people that are of age 30 or 40. I think there's a definite marked difference, and you can see it in this morning's newspaper.
What was it?
The Harvard graduates, 18% don't know what they want to do, and they're happy to be working.
Laborers.
Laborers. So I
Yes.
think there's been a change.
Guys
We
and
recognize.
parents.
Okay, yes,
Parents
all
want to
right.
see their children
Then we say, how about among their parents?
Parents want to see
Same.
their children happy.
Yeah, the parents haven't changed as much, the children have. Okay, right, okay. Now, some children, now incidentally,
Adjusted, well adjusted
we-
and relaxed.
wisdom begins when you analyze a problem. If someone makes an assertion, you can ask it of me. It's to ask, which group in society are you talking about? That's what we say variables. That is, what ethnic group are you talking about and what class group? Are you talking class rich or poor? You can make other divisions. Are you talking black or white? And so on, because it differs. So now you're saying in middle-class Jewish families, we're just talking about that, not of all humanity, that a portion of the younger generation is no longer following the same competitive goals as the parents do. I suppose that's right. A portion of them, not all of them. And that's indicated by the Woodstock movie and by hippies and by my two kids. Yes.
I have
Okay.
a different question. In this idea of achievement and success, is achievement measured by money or achievement measured by producing? This is something
Well-
that disturbs me personally very much. In other words, this younger generation in their 20s, like having read Greening of America, for instance, and cousins of mine, they will produce as teachers, as things that are non-working. They are functioning and produce. How do we, what is the criterion are we talking
Well-
about for achievement?
Historically in America, the achievement has been measured by money. And now this is another value. If we were to list these, materialism is another. It's important. Most people accumulate things: a house, a car, money, the things that money will buy, vacations, a dress, a good fur coat, and so on. You know, and often a successful man, he measures his success by what he puts on his wife's back. You know, how she dresses and so on. See, incidentally, when they become very wealthy, a switch takes place. Most of my life, I've dealt with very poor and very rich people. Because as a social worker at a settlement house, my board members had names like Lehman, Warburg, Buttenwieser, and so on, and then I worked on the East Side. So I had both, often in the same day, and often I felt peculiar. In the same day, I would have dinner at Mrs. Buttenwieser's house around a problem, or the Lehmans, and in the morning I would be in a welfare family's house, you see. So I got to see how they both lived, you see. Now, at a board meeting, a Buttenwieser, a Lehman, or a Warburg they wouldn't be caught dead in a mink coat. But a manufacturer who just made it, she'll come to a board meeting, and then when she sees everybody, she'll send it back and then put on a fur trim thing, you see. Then she'll learn from the other. In other words, if two generations have already had money, they don't have to prove it to anybody. But when you first get it, you have to show it, you see. But now what our kids, I think that's a good question you raise, are defining success in different terms, in more humanistic terms. Now, in the medical, let me illustrate it with the medical school and the law school at most places, but I'll illustrate because of NYU, which I know. At one time, it was taken for granted that the ambitious law school student wanted to get a job with a Wall Street firm, and that an ambitious medical student wanted to become a specialist and have an office on Park Avenue. It's very different now. These are very able students, and a third of them at least say, we want to work in a ghetto. Or we'll take a governmental job for a third of what they would make in private practice. I have a new relative, let's see, he's my daughter-in-law's brother, whatever that is to me. He works for the American Civil Liberties Union, and he makes $18,000 a year. It's not a bad salary. But in private practice, as an attorney, and he's a very good one, he could triple that. But he's idealistic, he's going to work for the American Civil Liberties Union. And he reflects a new generation. Yes.
Do you think it's partly because they have lived well, or do you think it's because they have independent wealth, or because they just feel that there are many more important things, and they have seen in their homes that money is not the key to a happy philosophy of life necessarily?
Well,
What is it?
what's your guess to that? You have a guess to that, don't you? The last,
I do have a guess, yes.
which is,
I have a feeling that they have seen that this is not, money is not synonymous with success
or with
and
happiness.
and they have tried to find other avenues. I have a lot of friends that moved to Israel quite recently from very wealthy homes who live in quite a frugal manner, who work very hard. They live
Modestly.
modestly, but they live a family life. They're not weirdos or anything, and they're very happy. They're not coming
So
back.
these values are changing.
No, I
Yes.
just have one question, that
Yes.
I happen to be a mother of these children, and I'm old enough to
Which
be a
ones?
mother too, I suspect. I
So?
think, yes, so I think that I have a completely different attitude.
Yes. Oh, so you're talking to generational difference.
That's right, but I would like to see
You have
what
children in Israel?
happens- No, my
Oh.
children are not in Israel, but I have one child studying for her PhD, and she has a grant, and another one who works, and they're
Yes.
twins, and et cetera, and has
Yes.
degrees.
So,
But these kids take away some of the parents' support or some of their own money and leave them alone, and all of a sudden, I think it's because it is a have generation, that all these things, they came so easily, they don't even know what it means not to have anything, ever at any time in their lives. They've just been thrown, and I myself have given my children really, I think, much too much.
I mean, But you told us materially.
Yes, too much material.
All right, now,
and
incidentally,
we do this.
I wanna call
But
to your
take
attention.
this away from these kids for a long time and let them feel that they can't come back to us. You see, it isn't that you just take it away and they want to live in poverty. What if they couldn't come back and get it? What would happen to them then?
Yes. All right, look, take a notice because I want to erase this. I asked 3 questions. Is America a humane society? Would you remind me of this since you have notes? I want to talk about this. Is America a humane society? Well, then maybe we'll go over this before we do. Look, what we've said right now is that these values are changing. That the dominant value in American society is still materialism, is still achievement and success. And what you've contributed, several of you, to the discussion is that in different generations it changes. And that especially now, a younger generation is I would agree with the third one that you said, is not that they are a have generation by in itself, although that's a factor, but rather that they're realizing that materialism in and of itself doesn't bring happiness or creative satisfaction. That you have to have, something more than that. Yes.
I just want to question one thing. What are your figures about these medical students that want to do ghetto work? I know law students, yes, and I've read many things. A friend of
What
mine
percentage?
Where do you draw this from? Because a friend of mine is a professor at Cornell Med. 2 years ago, all the kids said, oh, yes, we want to work in the ghetto, we this and that, and we must take care of the
Yeah.
poor and learn about all these Harlem hospital cases and so on.
Yeah, yeah.
And so Cornell Med tried
Yeah.
to set up a program in the ghetto, and not one of them went.
That's possible.
No, so I wonder, I think they
Well,
think
I would-
about it, but I think the doctors are still after the Park Avenue specialists. I'm
Yes.
not sure.
No, you see,
I
Look,
don't want to make any generalization, but
it's
just whatever your
one
information.
benefit of this course is that next time you have a debate at a cocktail party or a dinner party or just meeting people, you'll have a little advantage, is that we have to spell out what the percentages are. You can't speak about medical students in general. They break down. That is, I would say maybe 15 to 20% are interested in what I would call, not so dramatically as ghetto medicine, in the social aspects of medicine. That is, they really want to make a contribution to society. Now, they want to make a living at the same time. They're not saints. They're not going to a monastery or anything else like that. But they're not interested in the almighty buck in and of itself. You see, they're idealistic. They want to make a contribution, and they see that poor people need their help more than anybody else. Maybe that's 20% of the student body. Way at the other end, there's another 25, 30% who are self-centered little bastards who have their eyes set on a Park Avenue practice, who are moving everything to get that and don't give a damn about anybody else. It's like the rest of society. They're all the kinds of people. And then in the middle, there's about a 60%, I was judgmental when I used that word, There are about 60% of the kids who move one way or the other, who don't have strong feelings either way, you see. So I think you're right that there are the percentages. And now the proof of the pudding is what they do. Now I'm developing a program in medical school to involve about 20 students. Now let's see how many come. In law school, I think the percentages are larger, who've actually gotten governmental jobs for modest salaries and who have taken projects in the law school. So it differs. And it's a good thing to say is your behavior where your mouth is, put up or shut up when kids say this. But many of them are saying it, but not all. That's so. All right, so now we're saying these are the values of American society. So we talked about achievement and success. It differs by generation and by class. We have a strong orientation towards activity and work. That is, even when a man has a great deal of money, in America, in England, a man can have a great deal of money and not do anything. Just be on the continent and just travel from place to place. In the United States, it's frowned upon. Now, I've met a few people like that. I've met some members of the Fleischmann family. Fleischmann yeast, Fleischmann whiskey, and so on. Now, a few of them in Europe. Incidentally, they have a house that's like a baronial mansion in Cincinnati. But they're in Europe 11 months of the year. It's like saying they're really in America for 1 month a year. But that's rare in the United States, where somebody doesn't do anything at all. And you'll notice, you take the 6 Rockefeller brothers, or 5. Everybody is busy. They all get up early in the morning. Well, but I tell you, they typify a good part of the American value system. That very many wealthy people, incidentally, and in the Jewish community, a man I'm seeing one tomorrow. He's made a lot of money, he's retired, and he's as busy as he was before. He's a full-time philanthropist, and he works on all kinds of, not all of them are, some may have to retire for illness, but I'm saying in America, to be alive is to work, by and large, is to work. You find satisfaction through work. The European experience has been different. Now let's get now to our question. That is background. Is a mother's love conditioned? Do you love your child or your niece or nephew or whoever's close to you, regardless of what that child is or does?
Yes.
Do you?
I think so.
No.
Do you? Well, now, what influences, if you say, what would it be?
I think if some child drops out, and even though you know that they need help, the love that you have is there, but it's a different kind of expression of love. You don't have the pride,
Have you ever heard a mother say, if you insist on going ahead with that plan, like, come home late at night or marry this boy whom we don't like, or I won't love you anymore?
No, I never heard anybody say that.
You ever heard anybody say
I'm sure plenty of people have said it, but I never heard it.
In other words, the giving and the withdrawal of love has been used as a threat. I want to read something to you.
But is that real?
Is that real?
For some people, yes.
What do you mean by
I mean,
real?
it's a threat, but does it have?
Has the love actually been withdrawn?
Yes.
Well,
For some people.
let me give, have some of you grandparents? Yeah? Is there a difference between a mother's love and a grandmother's love?
Yes.
Yes.
What?
I think a grandmother's love
Now,
is
just a minute, you're speaking from secondhand experience.
No, I think there
I
is.
said, let
Yes.
grandmother speak.
I think a grandmother's love is constant, and a mother's love changes with the behavior of the child.
Is that true? Well, how about you? You a
Well, it
grandma?
may be true, but a grandmother isn't with these children enough
Yes.
to have changes of feelings.
Yeah, but does your love change if the kid misbehaves, if he doesn't do what he's told to do and so on?
No.
Or is the
No,
love
not
constant?
really.
How about the mothers?
The
No.
mother's does
I'm
temporarily.
a mother and I'm
And
And I think some
yours
mothers-
doesn't? Yours is constant.
I feel so strongly I can't talk on this.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah, because your children are small.
That's true. And I don't feel qualified because.
Okay,
they're
all right.
just-
Then let's talk about mothers in general. But look, what I want to do is give you, as a result of this course, a little insight into your own behavior that you may be unconscious of. You see? In other words, you may be doing many things that you're not aware of because of things that we pick up. So we're not personalizing this. We're speaking about in general. Let me give you an illustration of what you just said. I worked in camps, in the Jewish camps, though the fact that they're Jewish is irrelevant. And I noticed quite a difference in behavior of mothers and grandparents when they came. When a mother came, and they would say, little Sammy, who's 8 years old, have you learned how to swim? Have you made the basketball team? What have you done in arts and crafts? And a whole flow of questions. And the tone of the questions is serious, concerned, you see. And then the tone gets conveyed to the child. If I don't make that, if I don't learn how to swim, if I don't get this merit badge, if I don't get on a basketball, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, then my mother's going to be upset. See?
I think the crux of this is that a mother's responsibility, which as grandparents have no responsibility. And,
Right, okay.
and
Yes,
I
that's
feel
right.
this particularly strongly because I'm a widow. And my,
You have children,
yes, I have 2 children.
and there's a grandparent in the picture.
Yes, and the grandparents have no responsibility, none. They can,
So they love unconditionally.
they can ignore what they don't approve of very nicely, which they have done in the past, and just have much happiness from what they approve of and
Yes.
like.
Yes.
I think the giving and the withdrawal of love is the mother's most effective tool of discipline, and the father's. My pediatrician always
he
suggests this.
suggest
advocates
this?
Yes. Show that you disapprove of your child.
That's not love.
I think the child feels when you disapprove of them, you don't
No,
love
but it's
them.
just, you should disapprove.
Your
of what they
pediatrician
do,
actually
not what
suggests
they
Who's
that?
your
don't.
pediatrician?
No, no.
I have
No,
never
no.
heard of withdrawal of love.
Well, I'm not
As
talking
a
about
keeping of
saying I don't
discipline.
love you, but when you say to your child, don't do this and don't do that.
Because I disapprove of it.
Because I disapprove of it,
That's
it
different.
is a
Disapprove
withdrawal
is
and a
different.
sense of
Semantics,
love.
Yeah,
but
all right, but you
withdrawal of
see,
love is-
it is
Well,
very
it is
threatening,
not-
wait, it is very threatening to a child if he gets the feeling he may lose that love because of something he does. That's anxiety producing. Now, I think what your pediatrician may have, either you're misquoting him or he spoke loosely, is that he's saying if you disapprove of something, and he may be reacting to an over-permissive society. You want to try marijuana cigarette? You got a teenager? Go ahead, you see. And many pediatricians or physicians are saying, if you have a point of view about this, state it. And don't allow your kid to drift. You have to give them a sense of values. You see, what's right and what's wrong. That's what the socialization of the child means, you see. But the parent, the grandparent, I know the grandparent doesn't have to get up in the middle of the night, she can go home. But on the other hand, you see, and it is emotional, and I'm sensitive to what you said, it's hard to talk about, and I sometimes too, because we all tend to personalize this, and my kids just lost their grandfather, and that was a very touching experience for them and for me. He was my father, my wife's father. I lost my train of thought. So obviously it touches us all. But when he looked at the kids, and they went to him, it was, you might call an unqualified, undiluted love. Part of the reason, as I've thought about it, is that when we become grandparents, I'm now identifying with the grandparents because I'm on my way to becoming one, we have more of our life behind us than ahead of us. And we're in the twilight of our lives. And the mystery of birth gives us an immortality, which it's a folk reaction. We often don't put it into words. And therefore we see in the child a little bit of our own child, the grandchild a little bit of our own child, a little bit of ourselves, and then going back into previous generations, even of our great-parents, our grandparents and parents. So there are 5, 6 generations in that little schmerel, who's running around, you see. And therefore you value him for reasons way much more tremendous than whether he's the fastest kid on the block or he's very smart or very good. Just his being alive and normal and continuing the family name and who we are, that's such a tremendous realization that you're overwhelmed with joy that you've got him. Whereas you've got him, he's wetting his pants, he's not going to school, he doesn't dress. Obviously, as parents, we have that day-to-day responsibility. So really, you can't get this sensation till, kind of another generation. What do you think of that explanation?
I think it's too general.
Too general.
I think it's poetic and beautiful.
I think it sounds very sound to me.
Listen, with difference of opinion, what makes life, why is it too general?
Well, because I think this whole business of reacting to children is a personal and individual thing. I think
It is.
depends on one's own personality.
That's
As
right.
a child, I can remember feeling much more love for my mother
Then-
than I ever did for my grandmother.
Is that right? Yes, right, there are individual differences. That's right. That's a caveat, that's the one we have to have. But although there are individual differences, there are general conditions that influence us all, in which there are individual differences. See, students in the School of Social Work will often say, well, how can we study about human beings? They're all so different.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Well, in that case, we should disband our little seminar, and we should disband the university, because it means all we can do is talk about John Jones and Mary Smith. But you see, we can do more about that. For instance, in medical practice, you can say there are many conditions. Now, for instance, that's why there's an art to medicine, that if you've got a little bit of a chest cough, you can't look up in a manual, chest cough, do this, because there are many other individual variations that the doctor has to look at. Is this a young person? Is it an older person? Is he thin? Is he fat? Does he smoke a great deal? In other words, the physician has to take many factors into consideration in making the diagnosis. It's not mechanical. That's called individualizing the patient. Yet we have very many things in common. I mean, we all have eyes, we have a heart, it works in a certain manner, and we're influenced by certain things. The very fact that you're sitting here dressed in a certain manner, you're not sitting in a loincloth, we dress in a certain way, which society tells us the way to dress. That's a famous problem. All right, now, so what I want to sensitize you to is that as mothers and as grandparents, we internalize the values of our society. In other words, what the book says, competitiveness, get ahead, be something, make something with yourself. And look at the mother whose kid is riding the bike and the anxiety. Is he riding the bike as fast as the other kid? And a good pediatrician will tell you children have different rates of development. Some kids at 18 months walk very well, other kids walk very well at 15 months. There are individual differences. But the individual mother whose kid walks fastest, holds herself up, that she's doing better than the other parent. And we're very competitive with each other. Let me give you another illustration. When you visit foreign countries, let's take England, which isn't so different from where we are. If a young lady brings a young man home as a potential suitor for her hand, what is the first question in the minds of the parents of the girl about the young man? As what do they say to her about him? What do they ask?
What does he do?
What will he? What does he do? Right? Who said, the American or the Englishman? The American.
He's the Jewish Englishman.
That's cute. That's right. That's right. Now, the key word in what was said there is the word do. What does he do? As distinct in European society, including English society, is who is he? You know, I'll put, who is he? They will say, that's right, who are his parents? In other words, the Yiddish word is, what's his yichus? What's his background? Incidentally, in Fiddler on the Roof, do you remember? The girl sings, matchmaker, matchmaker, and she wants to marry the rabbi's son because I want the very best. Now that's nostalgia from the past. Can you imagine your daughter saying, I've got a great catch, I've got the rabbi's son? And so now it's another part of us. When you see the very fact that you laugh is also a little tragic. Because we've lost these values of the past. Where, instantly, another thing that Fiddler did, which was bad, although Fiddler was a great play, I happen to know the fellow who wrote the book, Joe Stein. He doesn't have much of a Jewish background. And he made the rabbi a comical figure. Do you remember?
Right.
And the rabbi in Eastern Europe was not a comical figure. If you speak to, our grandparents who came from there, and that was a jarring note. You see, here he might be in some places, you see, but in Europe he wasn't. So, therefore, what the sociologists will say is that what we have moved from who you are, emphasize are, to what you do. And therefore the emphasis on occupation. Therefore, when you're at a party, your first thought about when you meet a young couple is, what does he do? Businessman, doctor, lawyer. Because then you also know how to relate to him, what to talk about and so on. But you don't say, who are his parents? Most irrelevant thing in the world. If this man has got money, his parents, they could be running a house of prostitution. Who cares? And incidentally, another thing, who cares how he made the money? I live in a cooperative in West Hampton Beach. It's there are 54 little apartments, like in a big motel. And it's interesting to see who's elected to officership. We elected one fellow in the plumbing business, a real boor if I ever saw one. But he made a pile of money in plumbing, and he drinks too much, and he comes on a beach, and it's embarrassing. People say he's loaded with money, he's our president. And it's the way the values that we reflect is what we do. Nobody asked who's a college professor around here. That was almost a joke. You see? Because they were businessmen. They don't have respect for those kinds of things. And they tend to value money and what money brings. And if a man is in a stock market, that's the biggest thing. In a West Hampton Beach summertime, you listen to people on a beach, that's all they're talking about, is the stock market, money, the business that you're in, and so on. Well, you're frowning. That sounds a little vulgar to you.
It doesn't sound vulgar, it sounds real, unfortunately. I'm
Yes.
just responding.
Sounds
Yes.
like you shouldn't be there.
Yeah. Got some relatives. Yes. How did I land it? All right. So then, number one. Let me read this. Here, this will take a minute or two to read. I think it's worth it. It sums up what I'm trying to say. This doctrine of American individualism and of achievement and of success and of doing things and accumulating and so on is best grasped as a set of beliefs as to what should be and about what is. What many people believe, not just businessmen, is the following. One, an individual should strive to be successful in competition with others under the rules of the game. Agree or disagree? That by and large, that's the way Americans bring up children, including us, right? To be competitive. Number two, these rules involve fair play. Everyone should start with equal opportunity. B, no one should take unfair advantage through force or fraud or pull. In other words, we like to feel we made it on our own. No father-in-law, gave it to us. We didn't start life. And every rich man I make, Freudian slip, any psychiatrists in the group? Most Jewish rich men I meet, in the first 10 minutes of the conversation, feel a need to tell me that they started life poor.
Why are Jews guilty? No, I mean it.
That's not
That's
not
not
guilt.
Yes,
Guilty
they
about
are.
what?
Guilty for their money, that's a whole, other topic.
No, wait. Well, let's spend a minute on it.
Well, I mean,
The
the
first
whole business
question
of
is-
Bernstein with the Panthers is a fine example of it.
Bernstein with me.
Bernstein's
Oh,
party for the
yeah.
Panthers. I mean, we're getting
Yes,
on
yes,
an
yes.
offshoot, but it's part of the values.
Yes.
Why
You think
are
most-
Jewish wealthy people guilty for their money? Why
Now, the
are
first
Jews
question to
big,
ask-
large givers to liberal causes?
You think most Jews do feel guilty about their money if
You
they've
just
made
said
it?
every rich Jewish man you meet explains
That's not
it.
guilty. No, no, no. No, that's not guilt.
Pride.
That's pride that I made it.
Pride.
That's pride. I made it without pull or advantage or force.
Competitive pride.
I met one fellow, he's got millions. He said, when I was 15 years old, I was in a marketplace with my mother.
He's
You know?
saying that, I think,
Out of pride.
I disagree. I think he's saying it defensively because
We
he
will
knows
now
that
take
you're
a
not
vote.
in his category.
How many believe that he's doing it out of pride? How many think he's doing it out of guilt?
And something else.
Okay, all right.
First of all, we
Good,
don't
okay,
even know
yes.
the men in general.
No, no.
Well, we
This is a
don't
general-
know that. Yeah.
There is an answer. I'll tell you why. I think there's an answer to that. Yes.
I think that a lot of Jewish men brought up with very wholesome values, the values of our society, but wholesome ones, and of extreme wealth have also felt a need to do it on their own on top of this, perhaps in another field or in an allied field. They have felt this competitive
To
drive
prove themselves.
to prove themselves. And I'm not just referring to several, I mean many.
Yeah.
And you must respect them for it too,
Yeah.
because, you know, as you say, in Europe, they might be wandering around, traveling all the time. These people are contributing to society, and I wouldn't call them guilty members of it. I would say they're very constructive members of it.
There's another word I can't think of, but let me tell you what I think is the answer. Members of minority groups tend to feel a little bit strange wherever they are. Incidentally, in a study of alcoholism, do you think Jews would rate high or low as alcoholic? High?
Low.
It's low.
Very low.
Now, there's several reasons. One is that Jews, they often drink wine for ceremonial purposes. Now, one psychologist gave a very interesting reason why. First of all, the rate is factually low. Incidentally, I run many dinners for philanthropic purposes. Hotel owners, managers, will tell you, in a Jewish event, worry about the kitchen. A Gentile event, worry about the bar.
That might be a folk thing, but there was a study done on country clubs, and it just so happened that in the study, the figures show that Jewish people drank as much as Christian.
No,
No,
it
no, no.
shows that.
But they're not alcoholic. No, no, no.
Yeah, yes.
Okay,
They're
fine.
making
So
a
it is
distinction.
alcoholic, you're right.
May I-
Alcoholism.
It is going up.
It's going.
Yes, and it's
Not
changing.
a great deal.
Wait, wait, wait.
Changing. It's not a-
I'm distinguishing between social drinking and alcoholism. Alcoholism is where it's beyond, it's out of control. Incidentally, as the Jews are becoming more Americanized, we're taking on many of the characteristics of Americans, and alcoholism is one of them. But we haven't arrived there yet. It's still a low rate. Social drinking is increasing in upper middle class Jews. Working class Jews, it's like everybody else, it's not extreme. But alcoholism, out of control, lying dead in the street, you find very little of it among Jews. Now, the reason for it, one psychologist said, was this, and I'd like to get your reaction to it. He said, you can only get drunk when you're very secure. In other words, when you're not worried that someone's going to rifle your pocket, or also somebody is not worried that this will be embarrassing you before them, that then you can relax and let go. But if you're in a situation in a land where you're still not sure that you're 100% accepted, you tend to be like a stranger in the country on your best behavior. And therefore you don't let go. Let me give you another illustration. And don't repeat this outside. At NYU dinners, for fundraising purposes, which are usually, evening dress and so on, and I attend most of those. This has been kind of a new experience for my wife and myself. That is, in that large number. We've attended them here and then before, but now at NYU, it's almost every other month. So, I made an informal study. And one of it is who misbehaves. For instance, there's always a reception ahead of time with lavish liquor. And, some people can take it and some can't. And then you sit down with 4 or 5 wines. Well, if you're not, you don't know how to handle yourself, you can be in a little trouble, in terms of eating too much, either getting sick or getting drunk. Well, after the 5th, 7th, 8th thing, I began to notice a trend on who falls off their chair for having had too much. minority group members are on their best behavior. The blacks who are there sit straight and see someone on their right because they read a book, and then there's someone on their left. They're on their absolutely best behavior for the reason that they know that some people think if they're black, they may misbehave. Now, if they're back in their own church or their own family, they obviously will behave much differently and drink much differently. But among strangers, they're on their best behavior. The Jews are not quite that primitive in a sense that they've been around a little bit more, but they're on their best behavior too, especially grandmothers. Now, it's interesting. I said to some of my Protestant friends, I never heard of a Jewish grandmother drunk in public. Have you?
You don't know us.
Where? Where? In public?
I've seen it.
Where? I mean, in a street?
I've seen it.
Have you seen it? Where? In a country
Not
club?
on the street.
In what kind of setting? At a home?
Country club, I've seen.
In a country club?
I've seen it,
Never
but I
on the
wouldn't
street.
call them the Jewish grandmothers that you consider Jewish grandmothers, but they're
That's right.
Jewish and they're grandmothers.
That's right. Okay, all right. So
And
we're
they also
changing.
think they're 16 and they're drunk.
Yes, that's right. Right.
It's a horrible voice.
Well, see,
But isn't there a great difference
wait.
between social drinking, which is what this is at the NYU thing, and alcoholism, which is
oh, yes, yes, yes. No, you see,
result
wait.
of solitary drinking?
I want you to listen to what, there's a difference, obviously, between social drinking and alcoholism. The point I want to make is this. We haven't yet gotten to the point where at public gatherings, this is a common thing. It's still an isolated thing in country clubs. I've just been down to visit my new mother-in-law, my son's mother-in-law, and she has a condominium in Florida, and she took us to a country club, and I didn't like what I saw there at all in terms of behavior and values and whatnot. One woman said, all we talk about is golf at home. And I said, you've reached this age of life, that's now your only passion, you know? Half of the world is hungry, there's a war on and whatnot, and all you can talk about is golf. I said, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. We had quite a battle. But it's true. She's a grandmother, and she has one passion in life, golf. Her husband's retired, and they're idiots, you see. So they're... All right. But now,
It's a good thing I live in Florida.
that's right. I reject those relatives. They're friends of relatives. Now, the point I'm making is that these people who fell off the chair at dinners, not just at NYU with Columbia, do not lose much status. That is, I looked to see this little grandmother. Comes from a very wealthy family. I knew who her children were. And her grown children thought, you know, grandma kidding around, you know. They weren't embarrassed. A minority group person would have gone through the floor in embarrassment if anything like that had happened. But you see, when you're middle class white and Protestant, you're not that nervous about what the others said because you've arrived. This is your country. To be human and to be Christian is one and the same thing. You see?
The fact that they drink makes them, I mean, they're insecure to begin with.
No, no. Well, it's a social way of life, and incidentally, I've been at many non-Jewish country clubs where you see, you know, a great deal of public drunkenness, and the Jews are just starting to get there, but you know, hardly get. But you see, you can be that way. The point I want to make is the theme we had before. As a member of a minority group in a strange society, you tend to be careful,
I think
and you watch where you're at. You see, and in terms of what you do. And that explains, and I would say one of the reasons Jews give money to philanthropy and so on, is that they want to make this a safe country. They know that you can only be safe as Jews if it remains a democratic society. And they're aware of that, and they're aware you've got to give to Jewish causes and you have to give to non-Jewish causes. Others know, well, if things go wrong, and if we get a semi-fascist society or totalitarianism, and you're a high Episcopalian, no one's going to be knocking at your door in the middle of the night. But if you're a black or a Puerto Rican or a Chicano or a Jew, look what happened. Our psyche has been much more damaged as a result of the Hitler experience than we may be consciously aware of. It's really frightened us to death. And many of us still look a little bit around and are hard to aware that what we've got is permanent, you see, as many other families.
And there's no place else to go.
And there's no other place to go except Israel. And this also explains why some people are going to Israel. All right, so here's the internalization of values that affects mother love. We are influenced by that competitiveness. One last story, my father-in-law. My youngest son, who's a great kid, I feel that, like you do, you know, I choke up when I talk about my kids, but not so bad anymore. Because now they're so old, you know. But this one's 22. He just finished Brandeis. And fine athlete, good student, handsome, great guy with the girls, you know. You can't worry about him. He writes well and so on. He plays the clarinet, and he announced he's going to become a clarinetist. And when Grandpa heard this, he says, "That's great. You want to be a clarinetist, but what are you going to do for a living?" He says, "I just told you, Gramps, I'm going to play the clarinet." Well, Grandpa, who was a typical immigrant, started life as a painter, very ordinary. I mean, not what's commonplace. Then he went into the business world. He was in the real estate business, did fair. No millionaire, but comfortable. He said, "What will you make as a clarinetist?" He says, "Well, I might get a job in a symphony orchestra, out of town in Pittsburgh, $12,000, $13,000 a year." Grandpa said, $12,000, $13,000 a year for my grandson playing the clarinet? He stopped eating. He wouldn't eat. He was so upset. And you imagine poor Bobby, who loved him. He said, "Gramps, didn't you pay for my music lessons? You enjoy listening to me play the clarinet?" Gramps says, "That's great, but make a living." You see? It's Gramps internalized all this competitiveness, money, getting ahead, being safe, and so on. And to him, music, that's great for weekends and as an avocation, Mozart and everything else. And he loves to listen to his grandson play, but making a living, never. Now, Junior, Bobby, he's living in Cambridge, and he's having a hard time, starving to death, playing the clarinet. And my wife, who's not Grandpa, says, "Got to put an end to that. Get a job." And he says, "Mom, music is my life." She says, "But you can't pay your bills with it." And there's a dispute at home. Despite all that I know about this, I'm as victimized this by anything else. And I say, "Now, Rose, he wants to be a musician, let him. And if we have to help him," she says, "How long are we going to help him? We paid all through, school and whatnot."
That's just what I said.
I thought the record broke here.
No, but I think you are. This story illustrates.
That's not what you said. You said that once these children did not have the
No, I said
comforts,
take it.
once you take away the comforts, and he will not be a clarinetist. Well, so far he has not been deterred. He hasn't got the
But he
comforts,
hasn't
and
been
he's a
taken.
clarinetist.
I didn't say
Right.
take it away. I asked if he
Yeah.
thought that, and he didn't answer me.
If what?
Actually, whether you thought, whether you took it away. I didn't say that take it away and they won't do it. I just said, do you think that if you take all this security away, will he still continue? Now you answer your own question.
Well, it'll be tougher, and we have practically reduced it to nothing. He's on his own, and it's rough. Let me read this to you. Listen, we're all equal in here. This accent on achievement in a competitive struggle is carried into the bosom of the family, into the crib and the cradle. For many parents make their aspirations for high performance clear by word and gesture to the child even before he enrolls in school. We do it unconsciously. Margaret Mead even suggests, the anthropologist, that there's an initial condition inserted into the mother's simplest kiss that the child absorbs in nonverbal communication. Sent him a manifesto to that effect,
Tone of voice.
In tone of voice, "I will love you only if you achieve as much as the neighbor's child. And I can't love you if you don't." So while the child is learning that his whole place in the world, his name, his right to respect of other children, everything depends upon his parents and what kind of house they have and so on and so forth, he's also aware that there's anxiety as to whether he'll be successful in keeping his mother's love because of this. Let's go on to the next question. Is American society a humane society? If a man came here from Pakistan or India and didn't know us, he said, generally speaking, do you have a humane society here in the United States? What would you say?
Say yes.
How many say no? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Say no. How many say yes? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's 8 to 5. 8 yeses.
You have to put my vote. I say yes and no. I can't vote on that.
We have a rule for this seminar. You don't get credit unless you vote one way.
Don't you allow for any grays?
Yes.
I can't answer yes or no.
See, silly, that's a Jewish answer.
It's such a mixed up
Yes.
time,
It's a problem.
All right, for those who say yes, and those who say no, those who said yes, document this. Give me an example that makes this a humane society.
I
Like
think,
what?
On the whole, you're allowed to live and you let live in America. That doesn't mean that there aren't abuses
All right.
and brutalities and so on and so on. But the average citizen can go from birth to death without getting into any kind of real difficulty if he stays out of it.
Okay, what else? Yes.
Well, now, this is why I'm gray. I would illustrate the fact that we give welfare as a yes. The fact that it's not enough and that children don't get enough for food is no. So on the very same issue.
Okay, all right.
There are yes, the fact that we give it, yes. The fact that it's not enough, no.
Okay, all right, then we'll put them both down.
I think welfare.
Except, where's the weight? If when you add them all up, which is heavier on the scale?
Yes.
So let's put them, let's list them. What are the, give me yeses or nos.
I'd like to ask a question.
Yes, go ahead.
When you say, well, you over there, say, the average person can have what he wants in the society. What do you mean by the average person? Don't you mean a white person in the society? And is that true for black people and Chicanos and even poor whites, say, in Appalachia?
Well, that's a good question, Marion. I have to think about that.
Yes. Okay, so all right, now that's very good. That live and let live to a pretty much extent is class influenced. Girls, ladies. Remember we said in any question always ask class and ethnicity. Who are you talking about? Blacks or whites? Rich or poor? That live and let live, if you've got it and you're white, you get it. If you're born as a sharecropper in the South, you're not living very much. But for vast masses, it's true you can, yes.
We value the life of each individual. In some societies, individuals are not important. Whole groups of
Like
people.
Pakistan.
In China and parts of the Far East,
Anybody want to qualify that? Yes.
No, we have capital punishment, and then that would indicate that we don't value the life.
Although
How many
New York
states?
State,
But it still exists, and it's existing less.
but
It
it's
does exist.
diminishing, yes.
But even without capital punishment, the jails are so unbelievable.
but still,
it's
basically, we don't go and say that we have to build a dam, and if we lose 500 workmen, that's the price we have to pay for building it. Whereas in Pakistan, people are not valuable.
Well, what about the people who pick food? I would say that where there are people, we say we like lettuce, or we want grapes, but there are people who are dying and are crippled because they have to produce that. I think the difference is what America says and would like to believe about itself and what it actually does.
But let's compare ourselves to other countries. We
All right.
do this by ourselves. Jails. All right, it's lousy. Our jails are terrible. Compare them to the jail in Vietnam that we're rebuilding for the
Well, why don't we compare
And
ourselves
they're
with the Scandinavian
Our-
countries? Let's look up and not look down. Compare ourselves with
Very
the
good.
welfare, we provided the welfare in Scandinavia, the crime in Scandinavia, and how the criminals treated in
Well, there's
Scandinavia.
no literacy rates in the
Of
United
course.
States.
There's high crime and death rate and suicides.
Right.
Because they tell their suicides and we don't.
But
We tell them
Scandinavia isn't a melting pot. And
That's a very good remark.
Well, they have the highest rate of heart attacks in Sweden.
Yeah, well, wait, just a minute, before you jump, wait.
They do. I just read it. What?
Well, so what, there may be a nutritional
No,
problem.
so that, even though
No, wait,
they're
See, when you
there's
ask,
some pressure built in somewhere in that society if they're all.
when you ask about the quantity of a given thing, when you compare, I think it's a good remark, compare it with several countries. See, for instance, if you say poverty, let's say we put poverty here. Poverty in the United States isn't anything like the poverty of the Egyptian peasant, the fellahin.
No,
I mean,
but
he
you
has
said-
nothing.
You said in the first lecture that we don't really compare, when we live here, we don't compare ourselves, the poor people don't compare themselves to the poor Pakistanis or the poor
That's right,
Indians.
that's right,
He
yes.
compares himself to the rich man and
That's
who
right.
lives here.
Usually, that's right. We usually ask, how are we doing here in the United States? You compare one state with another and so on. But it's also legitimate looking at it sociologically. You say, we have poor welfare. Let's see what India does. It's much terrible here. There you'll see people dying in the street. You don't see that here.
But we also have resources that India doesn't have.
That's right, right. Now, on the other hand, you go to the Scandinavian countries or to England and places like that. I think I told you I took 20 social work students to London to see how do they handle social problems compared to what we do. For instance, a family is burnt out in London and they have to have emergency shelter. What do? I said to the students, I don't know, let's go ask and let's go look. They were absolutely flabbergasted because we looked at it on our eyes. We didn't believe just something that someone wrote. It looked like a Howard Johnson motel. clean and neat. We said, there was a Pakistani family there that was captured. They were trying to smuggle them in because, England has stopped its immigration. They were caught at shore in a boat. There were dozens of families that they were trying to smuggle into England. They were put into the equivalent, not a real Howard Johnson hotel, but a building that was that clean and neat. And then the English said, what do you do with your families? They said, well, we have welfare hotels back in New York. And they said it with embarrassment. But you see, now on the other hand, that was England. Suppose we went to India. It would have been different, you see. So you've got to make comparisons to know what it's like. All right, so we have, what?
The United States is one of the richest countries in the world. We can send men to the moon and
Precisely.
fight the Vietnam War.
Yeah, so therefore when you make comparisons, you have to ask, what are the resources that India has? It's a poor country. What are the resources that we have in the kind of jails that we have and so on? Now, if we had more time, we'd go with this. But having now put some of these on a board, in general, if the scale has to swing one way or another, let's vote all over again. Before we had 8-5. How would you feel now? On this side, we're not so humane, generally speaking, or generally speaking, we are? Generally speaking, what?
Take a vote.
Take a vote. How many say, yes, we are, despite all of this?
Because
1, 2,
we
3,
wanna
4,
get
5,
better.
6, 8. And no, looks like we haven't changed. No? 1, 2, 3. Hey, the discussion hasn't changed in
But
anybody's mind.
I think that basically we believe that we want to improve and that there are forces in our society that are moving us in this direction. So,
Well, let me tell you what I think. We are less humane than we think. We are less humane than we think. Especially as some of you made that good point about resources. Our jails are a disgrace to any civilized country, and certainly a disgrace to the United States as to what happens in jails. I interviewed the Protestant chaplain at the tombs where there have been those suicides. We have social work students there. Our social work students, we have a little girl at 22, goes in there, and we, incidentally, through Commissioner Anna Cross, I put the first girls into Rikers Island prison. The warden thought, a girl in a prison, she'd be raped. We've got girl social workers there interviewing in a private room in prisons, and nothing happens to them. But our kids, gee, if I had time, I'd tell you some interesting stories. But we don't. The jail is a horror and a disgrace. Now, look what we've done to the Indians, and how little we know about it. Do you know exactly what we've done to the Indians? You've got a vague idea. We had a conference in Oklahoma City. Incidentally, I found a difference in Jewish communities. In the hotel, there are just several dozen, I think at most, Jewish families in Oklahoma City. Or it's a small congregation, maybe 100 families. But when a Jew comes down, they know about it, you see. Whereas in New York, it's so big, you can live and die, nobody pays any attention. Of course, my name is Rosen, and I was on the program and so on, and a well-dressed lady came up to me. It was Friday afternoon. I don't go to services very often. Out of town, I do, which is an interesting phenomenon. Out of loneliness. She said, you going to services tonight? So I said, well, yes. At that minute, I hadn't thought about it. She said, where are you having dinner? So I said, I thought at the hotel. She says, at the hotel? Absolutely not. There were 3 women there, and with one voice, they all said, come to our house for dinner. They never met me before in their lives, you see. And I went, and it was great. I got a real feeling for the community. Now, at dinner, the next day, I met an Indian whose name was Harold Walkingstick. He was a social worker. He worked for the Indian Bureau. Now, when he was introduced to me, he saw a little smile on my lips by his name, Walkingstick, which he noticed and made a mental note. He told me about it later, which reflected my crudeness, he felt. And he was right. I mean, why should I smile at that name and not at a name like Rosenberg, which he might smile at? See, that's our own cultural backwardness. And he said to me, Dr. Rosen, have you any idea how my people got to Oklahoma? So I thought, now let's see. I remember vaguely. And so, do you? Well, the Indians got there when they were driven off the land by Confederate troops and federal troops. American Indians. Oh, yes, American Indians. American tribes. Cheyennes. In Georgia. It was their land since time immemorial. And they were driven at bayonet point. And They went to Oklahoma. So I was a little embarrassed, and he was pressing his point, that though I was an American educated citizen, I really wasn't so well educated on these matters. He then said, have you any idea how we got there, what form of transportation we took? I thought, let's see, before the Civil War, So I said, horseback. He says, by foot and by horse. He says, we walked about 2,000 miles. By this time I was beginning to feel pretty bad. And he said, I want you to know that of the 30,000 people who started out, we lost a third on the way. He said it took several years to walk through animals, through hunger, through illness, and whatnot. By this time I felt embarrassed for America and hurt. I just listened to him out. Therefore, what he was saying was right. He then said, when we got here, we picked very poor land that wasn't very fertile. So I said, why'd you do that? He said, I want to ask you. He says, you're an educated man. He said it sarcastically. He said, I haven't the faintest idea. Have you any idea?
Yes, probably they wouldn't have put off.
That's right. So the white man won't put him off. So if you want a blot on the American experience, the American Indian experience is a big one. So, which is not to say we don't have this. It's a mixed picture, you see.
But we also have the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which is a continuation of the Indian experience.
Yes, and we have a Bureau of Indian Affairs. Now, there are more Indians in it, and it's not the best of bureaus, that we have here and so on. Now, I want to explain this term here, private affluence and public squalor. Do you know where that's from? Kenneth Galbraith's book, Harvard economist. Private affluence and public squalor. And there's one more other point before we finish. I want to get it close.
Starvation under the nose.
In America?
Yes.
Hunger.
I've read a lot. I've read very
All right, hunger and malnutrition.
Malnutrition, yes.
Now, incidentally, a Swedish economist said that it's a disgrace that in the United States, we're still talking about wiping out illiteracy in the United States. I forget what our rate is, about 11% of functionally illiterates. Most of the Scandinavian countries did away with illiteracy dozens and dozens of years ago. So look how backward we are. What? And an infant mortality, we're 18th among the countries of the world. We used to be 12th. Incidentally, since we're concerned with children, the way you measure values, a number of economists and sociologists have said, is by measuring, if you don't mind my quoting Karl Marx, he said you can measure the values of a society or the degree of civilization of a society by the way it treats women and children, by the status of women and the status of children. So let's stay with the status of children for a minute. If you take the way we treat the status of children in the United States, hunger and malnutrition by class and ethnicity, black, Chicano, and so on, In other words, mothers come into the NYU Medical Center furious. They say, we don't give a damn about your open heart surgery and the wonders of medical science. We've got children who aren't eating. And that we'll do more about health in the United States, not by doubling the number of doctors, but by improving the food and the nutrition that children eat, you see. So miracles of heart transplants, just affect a few people, you see. Well, now, I brought in a thing that maybe if one of you wanted to borrow. Physical abuse of children, the battered child syndrome. There's a study at Brandeis. Now, there aren't too many countries in the world that are advanced as ours. You see, quite often a child would come into the pediatrics clinic and the mother would say he fell down the stairs. But then in examining it, they also found a burn, on the kid's behind or on his fingers, something like that. Or certain breaks which didn't seem to be, and the pediatrician would say, there's something peculiar here. But you can be sued for maldiagnosis and so on. And it wasn't until the last 20 years that we've identified what now is a battered child syndrome inflicted by the parents.
I used to see it very often.
Where? In Harlem?
In the ghetto, in my classroom. Children would be punished with irons, and they would be made to sit on hot radiators.
Is that right?
Babies
What did you
were
do
stuck
about it?
in drawers.
Yeah.
Well, I used to tell the guidance counselor, and I used to say, look what's going on. Someone should go into that house. No wonder the child isn't learning and isn't
Yes.
behaving. He's being victimized.
Yes.
It's just horrifying. to school without coats to be punished.
Yes. And the poorer the families, unfortunately, often
They were made to eat all kinds of weird foods, too, when they were bad.
Yes. Well, so that says something about the nature of our society. It's a little nauseating, but it happens. Now, what explains this? These last two questions. Private affluence and public squalor. Here's what Galbraith means by it. He said, many a family by itself, whether they're making $10,000 or $30,000, they're comfortable. That they have a home, they have a washing machine, a TV set. When it rains outside or snows, their house is warm and so on. And they have a car and they take a vacation and so on. But he said they'll take a vacation and drive by a lake where the fish are dead. Or they'll walk through a street where, if you walk through a street, you walk through dog excrement and so on, you see. Where the street is dirty, where the rivers are polluted, where if you take a deep breath in the out of doors, so is the air is polluted as well. You see. The noise in the street. In other words, the city itself is becoming difficult to live in. It's being characterized by squalor. And yet, many individual citizens are themselves in good shape. And not doing much about the public squalor, like it has nothing to do with me. Even though a man can be very rich and he wants to get to the Idlewild Airport, and he may have a private car or a taxi cab, he still can't make it because of the congestion in the streets. He suffers as much as anybody else. And if Bellevue Hospital isn't as good as he should be, and if he's hit by a truck in downtown Manhattan, he has to go there despite all his money, and if the ambulance is late, he's going to suffer from that. Or if the fire department doesn't function as well as it should, or if we don't have enough firemen. Even if you're rich, you're going to be affected by that public squalor. But now here is a $64 question I want to pose to you. Why is it that the average citizen, including you, good ladies, who are honest, and truthful, and you're on the side of the righteous and you want to do something about poverty and so on, what explains the fact that by and large in the United States, we are reluctant to help those who haven't made it? First, I want to see whether you agree with that. We're reluctant really to help the poor. We're judgmental about the poor. A phrase I didn't read here because I didn't have enough time is that just before that part about the mother, it's part of the American folklore that everybody gets their just desserts. That as you work hard, you're going to make it. And if you're lazy and a bum, you're not going to make it and you're going to be poor. And if there's something wrong with you, or if you haven't made it, you're to blame, not society. Do you agree with that? And then let's explain why. No?
I do think that people are reluctant to help the poor. Otherwise, taxes would be higher for people in higher income brackets, and they wouldn't think of ways of not evading them, but getting around them, because these taxes could be used to improve public facilities and for greater welfare benefits. I also think that maybe the same person will donate, the same wealthy person will donate a large amount of money to charity, but that's saving him a big tax bill. It's to his benefit. I think we're basically selfish, self-seeking, and this drive for competitive success is just much stronger than any type of social responsibility drive.
Now you disagree?
Well, I don't really think that any of us have developed too much beyond the caveman, really. We're just
Well, then you agree that we are reluctant.
Really.
I think the benefits, too, if they didn't have to sell tickets, which take up part of the donation, and just took the donation, if they could get the same money without selling theater tickets
All right,
and things.
but wait, look, let me sharpen the question. Are we, if we agree that we're reluctant to help the poor, what is the reason for it? Is it because we're bad people? Why?
Part of it that we have been an economically mobile society. Many people have moved up from poverty level to affluency. Unfortunately, when this happens, some people are reluctant to turn around and help people who are coming up behind them. They want to be the last on the boat.
What do you think of that? Do you agree with that? You agree?
I think that's part of it. I think also another reason is that what you said before, that is that part of the value of American society is work, and that the person who fails at work is a personal failure rather than an institutional failure. But I think another reason is also prejudice.
Yes.
I think we have to develop a social conscience amongst our children, as well as a drive for, success.
You see, originally, when we answered this question, why are we reluctant to help those? And I think what you said was quite correct. Often we said, well, it's because we're selfish, we're a little bit of bigots, we're racist, and all that is true. Especially if we're dealing with blacks and others, our skin tends to tingle, and so on. But now we're beginning to have a slightly additional explanation, which flows a little bit from what you're saying. That is, I think, extremely interesting, and it's really, for those who are in the middle class, something to think about. Because of our, Richard Heilbronner had an article in Transaction magazine. He called it benign neglect, but the benign neglect, in characterizing this attitude of reluctance to help the poor. And he said it's, in addition to the fact that we're racist, and that we're often bigoted, and that we're suspicious of the stranger, he said it's our very democratic society. This seems like a paradox. The very fact that some of us have made it have tended to reinforce in us the belief, if we made it and we came from an immigrant background and we didn't have anything, and it's not just the Jews who say that. The Italian immigrant, he's got a little house, I came here with nothing, I made it, why don't you? You see?
Even the first settlers who came here.
Well, the first immigrants who came in 1870, 1880, 1890.
When they founded the country, the whole belief of forming a democratic country and then doing exactly the opposite to people who followed just shortly afterwards.
That's right. Yes, even though they wanted, freedom for themselves, they then changed it to the succeeding generations. But then, as we became richer, people said, well, the Horatio Alger story, although a myth, also is true for some people. That was the question you were asking before. Horatio Alger for blacks, few and far in between, although there are some examples of that, you see. Or for Mexican Americans, or for the American Indian, or for many other whites who are in there are big pockets of people who never saw these things, or the Appalachian whites and so on. But for certain people in the middle class and whatnot, Horatio Alger is true. And I've often thought to myself, it's so true that we take it for granted. That is, I think to myself, my family background is ordinary, and yet it's very dramatic. Grandpa fled from the Tsarist army, not a nickel in his pocket, came without his wife, and then his wife came later and had no job, didn't speak the language, was taken in as a boarder by another family, and so on. We take that for granted because all of us had this. But yet in world history, it's an extremely dramatic illustration of having made it. Against all odds, nobody helped us. We didn't cheat. We didn't murder our fellow man. We didn't borrow from anybody else and so on. Through our hard work and good luck and everything else, and mainly sweat and tears, we're successful. Now here's this poor guy who hasn't made it. Our first thought is not what's wrong with society, that is prejudice, discrimination, and so on, but rather what's wrong with him. So therefore, when we read in a paper, therefore we say lazy, improvident, runs around with women, he's a drunk, these things easily come to mind, you see. And then when we read about the welfare hotels, we become indignant because the city is paying so much money, which is a disgrace. But what is a much greater disgrace is that for all of that money, there's a mother with 6 kids in one room paying more rent than you're paying, even though you're middle class, and so on. And she's cooking on a hot plate, try that for laughs sometime, and washing the dishes in the bathtub. Well, and with 6 kids, and it's only the reason that kid fell down that shaft, is that where does a kid in one room play? He plays in the corridors. And inevitably, and he fell down the elevator. You see, that's what happened. So now this is a new wrinkle now to explain why we're reluctant to help the poor. It's our own very success. And therefore it's difficult for us to understand this as well as we should. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Well, we got 4 more
I
minutes.
think you can't remove prejudice from what she brought up.
Yes.
I don't agree completely because of the fact that I think, first place, I think the group of women who are here and with you are a special group. We wouldn't be here if they weren't.
How are you
with
special?
Well.
Outside the fact that you're at the wall.
Well, that's one thing that makes
Yes.
it a special thing already. Secondly, I was in Sweden last summer, where there is no melting pot, and where so-called the education is given to everybody. And I was with a group of people who were academic people, and it seemed as if it was a fine society till you start to talk and hear the problems that their children have. And then you read that they have the most terrible strike possible, which they've had for 3 weeks. So I think we tend to maybe in this group think that there are problems that we have that maybe other people don't have.
What?
Well, I think that, again, that we should look up, and granted, there
Sweden
are
is
problems
having
that exist
dreadful
elsewhere, but I
Yes.
think that we should aspire to the best that we can provide for the greatest number of our citizens.
Yes, I think that's an important point in comparison. If I had to sum up these 3 weeks, let me quote a well-known Jew, Albert Einstein. He said, in the last analysis of modern society, during the last 2 centuries, a human being, he wasn't just talking about Jews, but a human being will find creative satisfaction and the fulfillment of his humanity to the extent that he participates in the increased humanity of society itself. And therefore, private affluence and public squalor, can't go hand in hand. So it's the extent that we worry about our fellow human being that really is the sociological definition of being human. It's what separates us from being animals. That we're concerned with family, with friends, with neighbors. Not as much as we should be, obviously. But what Einstein is saying is that to the extent we're more concerned with other people and with other concerns, and it's, I think, part of the Jewish tradition to be concerned with the community. It's the community that saves us in a literal sense, that gives us succor, that gives us support, that gives us a sense of who we are, where we've been, where we come from. Without these traditions, we're nothing, really, in the sense of any psychological sense of security. So therefore, if you're getting all of that from the group, from society, either your religion or anything else, then obviously you have a contribution to make. It was given to you. And therefore you have to ask yourself, however you were born, and we were all born fortunately. That is, we're not walking the street frightened, right? By and large, we live lives of fair security. And many millions of people, including many Jews, did not. Well, therefore, in that kind of circumstance, what Einstein was saying, it becomes humane, it becomes a matter of conscience, it becomes a matter of morality, both in human and Jewish terms, to return it back. Therefore, the welfare of institutions like a Y, a university, a school, and whatnot should be a matter of concern. So you're saying we're not special, but it's like we say, well, we're chosen people. We've chosen to take on more tasks, not to make ourselves better than anybody else. Isn't that right? So in that sense, I think that's what as we see ourselves. And I imagine another theme of what we try to talk about is that to the extent you understand the other human being, you understand yourself. So as you give or withhold that kiss to your child, you can say to yourself, by God, in the seminar that I participated in about the nature of our society, it influenced the very nature of the kiss that I give to my child. And on that note, this little seminar ends.
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.